Okay, we're now broadcasting. Hi, everyone. My
Hello.
name is Fred Martin, and I'd like to welcome you to our interview series, What is Computational Thinking? This is a production of the CSTA at csteachers.org. And Pat, would you please introduce our guest?
Well, first, I'm Pat Phillips, member of the CSTA task force, retired CS teacher and editor of the CSTA Voice newsletter. And we're delighted to welcome Eric Snow today. Eric is an education researcher in the Center for Technology and Learning at SRI International. So welcome, Eric. We're so happy that you could join us today.
Oh, thank you.
Fred and I have a set of questions for you
Okay.
to get our conversation rolling, but first, would you please introduce yourself, maybe tell us a bit about your background and current position?
Sure. Happy to do that. Well, as you said, I'm an education researcher currently at SRI International. I've been there for approximately 7 years. I work primarily in the area of assessment, and for the last 4 to 5 years in assessment of computational thinking and generally in computer science education. Prior to that, I worked a lot in science and math. Prior to SRI, my background, educationally speaking, is in cultural anthropology. I have my bachelor's degree in cultural anthropology, and then my PhD in education research and evaluation methods with a focus on measurement and assessment. So I've dabbled in a lot of different types of research contexts and done a lot of different kinds of assessment projects, both teacher performance and information and communication technology literacy several years ago prior to my work in computational thinking. I have 2 sons, ages 4 and 6. One just started first grade and went back to school last night, so it's an exciting time of year. I live in Santa Cruz, California, and enjoy a lot of activities in the redwoods and on the coast. So happy to be here.
Welcome.
Thanks, Eric. That was a great introduction. I immediately want to go off script, but I won't because we did prepare you with some of the questions.
Okay.
But I definitely want to ask you later on how cultural ethnography, that must be a real cool lens to bring to this work. But so let's start out today by asking you, how would you define computational thinking to a 3rd grader?
Well, it's funny. The first part of the question is great. The second part for a 3rd grader, I always get challenged by that part of the questions. But I think if I were talking to a 3rd grader, or if I were talking to my son, say even in 1st grade, I would say that being a computational thinker means learning how to use computers, which I think is something that 3rd graders, they know what computers are, and certain ways of thinking to solve problems. I think at a very high level, that's how I think of computational thinking. I think if I were to provide a bit more detail, I would say something like computational thinking is not just about knowing about things like computers or coding or programming, which a lot of 3rd graders might have some experience with or at least know about. It's really about being able to use your knowledge of these things to solve challenging problems. It really means being able to work in groups to talk and think together about how to use computers, coding, and programming and other ways of thinking to create exciting new solutions to challenging problems.
Cool.
And I try to emphasize, I really try to emphasize the idea of problem solving, using certain types of tools and ways of thinking rather than the focus being on computers per se or technology per se. It's really about how you use these things to engage in problem solving. That, to me, it's the integration of those things that makes a computational thinker.
I think that's a great definition for a 3rd grader because obviously they understand solving problems. And
right.
So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'd like to elaborate a bit on some more ideas around computational thinking, and that is, would you describe how your understanding of computational thinking has changed over maybe the last couple of years, 3 years?
Yeah.
And I guess I made the assumption it has changed. And if so, how and why did that occur?
Okay. Well, much of my work around and thinking about computational thinking has been with regard to how to measure it, how to assess it. And that aligns a lot with my work at SRI. but generally speaking, I think my thinking has transitioned from one, I think that was largely focused on what I would call the component computer science knowledge and skills, the kind of underlying computational thinking. So like things like knowing what algorithms are and decomposition and loops and all kinds of computer science concepts. I think that perspective is necessary when you're designing and developing assessments, that kind of finer grain where you're taking things apart, deconstructing and kind of modeling these constructs. And that was how my thinking was very early on. I think it's transitioned to a focus on more general problem solving skills that I think students really desperately need to develop. One of the things that we have seen time and time again after 3 years of piloting our assessments and using our assessments is that we've been able to start to disentangle how students get challenged by these problems. And what is very clear to us is that even when students know the underlying computer science content knowledge, for example, they really struggle with the problem-solving aspect of it. Being able to, for example, engage in evidence-based argumentation. Just being able to, in other words, provide a rich explanation or a rationale for why you chose a certain solution. It's that aspect that becomes very challenging for students. So my focus has shifted more to how do we foster those skills, those higher level, higher order thinking skills, and how do we use computer science or computational context to do that? Because I think that one of the things that has always been interesting to me is that you can learn these higher order skills in science or math or computer science. I think that the question then is in which context, I think, can you really, learn them best or learn them in particular ways that can be transferred. And what I'm really interested in is exploring those relationships within computer science.
Well, I think if you can crack that nut of how to teach students how to apply those skills to actually how to solve the problems, there will be many, many grateful teachers for you. I have a follow-up question. How do you see computational thinking as distinct from these other thinking and problem-solving skills that you've sort of hinted at a little bit? Could you clarify that a bit more?
Sure. I think that this is actually a really important distinction because I see when I go out into the field, I see a lot of folks falling on one side or the other of these, and some people are calling computational thinking things that I would really call logical thinking or problem-solving skills. So I think it's really important that I think of computational thinking, not that I think that how I think of it is really important, but how I perceive it from the work we've done is that it's really the application of these what we call other skills, whether they're problem-solving, logical thinking, critical thinking, inquiry-based skills in computational contexts or using computational tools and ways of thinking. To me, that's how I distinguish between the two. The problem-solving, inquiry skills, those kinds of things sit at a higher level of abstraction across a lot of different subject areas. They can be applied in different ways and learned in different ways in different subject areas. And what I'm really interested in is how that feedback loop is created in computer science and whether those skills transfer.
Thank you.
Especially at the younger ages, I think it's the development of those more general skills that we should focus on, using computational settings to engage students and motivate them, and also teach them particular ways of problem solving as we transition to the older grades or the upper grade levels. I think then the focus becomes more and more enriched with the computer science, conceptual knowledge, content knowledge, and higher order ways of thinking within computer science specifically.
So, Eric, I've got the next question. It's about assessment. And it's my understanding that you're working on a tool called SRI-PACT. Is that right?
Yeah, the PACT or PACT really stands for Principled Assessment of Computational Thinking.
Okay.
And really what that's over like an umbrella term for a lot of our projects that focus on the assessment work and revolve around exploring computer science, both the assessment work and then also our measures of implementation. Our implementation study will be taking place over the next 2 years, in part using the assessments and in part using other measures. But when I think about assessing computational thinking, I really think about it, what it means is, I frame it in terms of what we do at SRI. We use a methodology called evidence-centered design, and that really helps us think about what we call an assessment argument in particular ways. It really breaks it down into 3 components. And these components really apply to whatever domain you might want to look at, and I in this case, computational thinking. And that is really, what do we want to measure? What do we want to know about students and what they learn? And that we call focal knowledge, skills, and attributes. And that's kind of the first part of an assessment argument, is really specifying what those things are. What do we care about that students know and can learn? And in a curriculum, it's often the learning objectives. They're stated as learning objectives. And in assessment, we restate them in a different way. The second part of that is, what kinds of things can we observe in the things that students do and say that will give us evidence of these things that we care about them learning? So what kinds of evidence can we observe? We call these things potential observations, and they kind of form that second part of an assessment argument. And the third part of it really is, what are the kinds of things that students produce and do that will produce that evidence? And those are what we call potential work products. And when I think about any kind of domain and assessment, I think about breaking that domain down into these pieces, or these 3 pieces, and forming what I would consider to be an argument, linking those 3 pieces together.
Could
and
you
really
restate the 3 pieces?
So the 3 pieces would be what we want to know about what students can learn and do, what we observe, the kinds of evidence and things we observe in what they produce that will give us evidence of what they can know and do, and the last thing is what they actually produce. Whether it's a response to an assessment task or a project, and it's in that we see. I think those 3 things actually parallel what teachers want to know too, right? They want to know, generally speaking, what their students know and can do, what kinds of evidence they can use to figure that out, and what kinds of things their students' activities, projects, whatnot in the classroom that students are going to do to produce that evidence and help them figure out what students know. I mean, and teachers do that in different ways. But I think that teachers, if they think about computational thinking or their learning objectives in this manner, in these 3 levels, if you will, I think it'll really help them kind of break down and think about how to assess these skills. And for teachers, it's important to realize that when it comes to the kinds of work products that students produce, they need to think much more broadly than we do in the assessment world necessarily about the kinds of things that students can produce in a classroom, particularly projects and other kinds of peer work, like group work that they might produce. Those often are better measures of these constructs.
It sounds like there's a great deal of research to continue with with those goals. But I'm wondering if there are other areas of educational research, some research that you think we should still investigate related to computational thinking, aside from all of this assessment research that you're so actively involved in.
Well, yes. I think that one of the really important ones, particularly as CS for All starts to take hold nationally, whatever it ends up looking like, I think that one of the things we really need to better understand is, as these different programs, ECS, CS principles, and other programs proliferate, both in secondary education and primary levels, because there's going to be a lot more development in middle and primary levels, I think, in the coming years. We need to better understand how these kinds of programs and their implementation affect student learning. We really need to understand what's going on in the classroom, the different variations of those implementations, and what really works in terms of helping student learning across a variety of different types of students. And I would be remiss if I didn't at least put in one more plug for assessment, but this would also help teachers as well. And that's really the enriched understanding of what I would call learning progressions, or how do we link what students should know and do from primary grades through upper secondary, and as more and more research projects are done in secondary and particularly in primary and middle school, and those projects include assessment components and other types of student measures, we can start to build a more integrated progression across the grade levels. That's something that I think a lot of people are looking to better understand.
Thank you. Fred, I think you had you wanted to follow up with something.
Yeah, Eric, I wanted to ask you how your background in cultural ethnography bears on your current work.
Yeah, so it makes me a little schizophrenic at time, actually. But no, just joking. Really what it helps me do is, I think, have a more enriched understanding of, I think, honestly, assessment, because a lot of people like to say certain things about assessment and have a certain perspective when you use the word assessment about how you're thinking about student skills.
Like and grading, it's like a
it's all rubrics and other things. And I guess my background in anthropology makes me think of assessment much more broadly, if you will. And also, in any given research situation that I'm in, thinking more broadly about the kinds of evidence that you can bring to bear on addressing important research questions. I think that too often qualitative research is framed as anecdotal and used in particular ways to frame the more robust quantitative evidence. And I'm lucky enough to work at a place where they really value anthropology, cultural anthropology, and a real rich understanding of the value of qualitative evidence in these studies. So, yeah, it's actually helped me quite a bit. I have transitioned, and I think I have a nice toolbox to use in the research that I'm lucky enough to be doing.
Maybe we could take a question from Joe or Michelle or Irene. Do any of you have anything you want to ask?
Hi, this is Joe. Can you? I presume you can hear me.
Yes. Good. Hi, Joe.
So a couple times you mentioned transferring the notion of transferring problem-solving abilities, from one domain to another. And there are any number of individuals, and I think this is accurate, that will claim that there has never been any direct link or proof that learning problem-solving skills in computer science, for example, will affect problem-solving abilities in who knows what. So, how do you respond to this sort of thing, and what work are you doing that maybe will avoid this problem?
Well, it's a very legitimate issue, and they're right. There is no good evidence that supports the claims that are made about the link between computational thinking and these more general skills, right? And what goes on in computer science and coding and programming in these more general skills. I think everybody believes that theoretically these things should be there. These relationships should be there. And one of the ways I think we can start to unpack this is typical validity investigations of assessments include looking at relations to other variables. So looking at relationships between measures of computational thinking and, for example, more general problem-solving skills. And so one of the projects that I'm working on right now that is actually based in Hong Kong is we are lucky enough to have a number of both kind of close-in internal measures of computational thinking and then some more external measures of what we would call more like problem-solving and logical thinking, not necessarily in computational contexts. And then we also have some measures of what we call computational knowledge that are closer into what we would consider more traditional computer science knowledge and the application of that knowledge in computer or in coding and programming type settings. And we're hoping to be able to use that variety of assessments and different types of evidence to start looking at these relationships. Luckily enough, the design of the study is such that we have a very large sample of students over a number of years, and we also are lucky enough to have control groups. And so in this study, so we're going to be able to, I think, do some fairly robust investigations of these relationships. Now, granted, this is an international context. What we'd like to do is bring some of these types of studies, which this is there's random assignment in this study, and there's we have some opportunities in Hong Kong that are challenging in U.S. schools, not impossible, but it's these kinds of more robust experimental type settings with multiple measures that are going to help us start to unpack this and evaluate these claims that are made.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Eric, do you have any closing remarks?
Other than it's a very exciting time to be doing this work, and my background isn't as a computer scientist, but I feel incredibly lucky to be working with so many different types of computer scientists in this group and computer science educators, and it's been a great learning opportunity for me, a context in which to apply my assessment skills. And I think as I become more involved in the CS for All group and that initiative, I'm really excited to see this kind of taking hold nationally and the opportunities that that's going to bring to all of us, I think, to achieve some important goals.
Thank you so much, Eric. I think this is a really exciting time for all of us, and this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time and for including me in the conversation you're having with everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.